So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
I'm back, and it's our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. I'm going to tell you in just a minute what happens when you're sick and married versus what happens when you're sick, married, and have a child. We're going to discuss everything during our marriage hour, from the virtue of temperance during our temperance series and how to grow in temperance both in marriage and outside of marriage. We'll turn to the wisdom of the saints, from St. Thomas Aquinas to St. Augustine and others. We'll also continue our debunking pro-abortion arguments perspective here, and we'll take arguments having to do with, well, you can have a child because you're married, but other people can't. So stay tuned for that and more during our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. Okay, so here's the reality. This is what happens when you're sick and have a kid, and you're not just sick and married. So I've been married for a couple of years now, and I've been out the last couple of days because I have this thing when I get sick, it's my throat that goes first, and it just continues to be a beast. I actually really appreciate the end of being sick because I have this really nice kind of deeper voice than I usually do, or whatever you want to call it, because I do not have a deep voice, as you are well aware. But here's what happens. I remember when I got married and I was sick, and there's all this love and care when my husband was sick. Let me make you bone broth, let me make you soup, let me give you vitamins, let me make sure you're hydrated, can I make you a cup of tea? Oh, you should really rest. Take out your book, enjoy. Then I had a kid. And part of me, while I was sick with my kid, was thinking my husband better not even get sick, because you know what? If he's sick, he can be in the other room. I'm not going to be there, and he shouldn't sleep too much because I've been sick, home alone with a baby, taking care of her. So he better not even think about, laying on the couch or laying around sick. I was looking at myself and I was seeing the ugly come out, thinking he cannot get sick. Now, lo and behold, he has not gotten sick yet. Kind of felt like he was fighting off a cold. And no, it's not the Rona. We're not facing the COVID over here. But I think it's really funny because when you're sick and you have a kid, there's kind of this bye Felicia moment where you are no longer willing to help your spouse. It's every man for himself. And it's so funny because I'm discovering being sick while having a kid is so different. You almost kind of used to that. If you're me, look forward in some ways to those sick days, because it gave me a full excuse to lay down or sit down at home and read and read and read and read. Now, all I want to do is sleep while I'm sick because I have a nursing child. But it's funny because I came to this realization yesterday. From now on, when I am sick, it will no longer be a reading day. It was kind of sad. I was mourning that my sick days were no longer my own. My sick days are now, oh, your baby's teething today. Maybe God blessed me with being sick so that I didn't have to balance even more. Instead, I could just feel semi-miserable inside and then be dealing with a crying, needy baby. There's one point when I was in the kitchen just trying to wash a couple dishes. Let me tell you, I couldn't even take a sip of water the last 48 hours without my child being extra needy. Maybe, she was also probably sensing that I wasn't feeling good. But I was just trying to wash a dish or two for a minute so that all the dishes didn't stack up. And she literally crawls up, climbs up my leg, is hugging my calf with her cheeks smushed against my leg. And she's just in heaven because she's got my leg. She's with mom. Everything's okay. Everything's great. And I was smiling and I'm thinking, okay, I'm done with the dishes. I'll just pick her up. And I turn around to try and pick her up. And then she falls over and hits her face. And of course, any moment where you're I'm getting you. And then boom, they crash and hit their face. And it's more screaming. And it ruined the precious moment, but the precious moments always continue. But it's really funny. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. It's our weekly marriage hour. I've been out sick the last couple of days. And I was really thinking about this. Doesn't my husband know, and I'm thinking about this while he's at work, doesn't my husband know that it's a corporal work of mercy to visit the sick? I reminded him, not quite in so many words. I don't think I mentioned corporal work of mercy. I don't know if I said visit the sick, but every time I called him to complain while I wasn't feeling good, I know that he had to have known. I was reminding him of his corporal work of mercy that he had the opportunity to provide by coming home early. He was coming home to provide a corporal work of mercy of visiting the sick. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. All of this being said, while I've been homesick the last few days, I'm always homesick because I work remotely. I'm always home with my baby girl. But I've been thinking a lot, especially the last few weeks, about workaholism. We did a couple of episodes on workaholism, and we'll link to those in the show notes, because if you are a workaholic, well, I'll help you figure that out in the linked podcast. Head over to relevantradio.com/trending, and there I ask some questions to help you recognize if you're workaholic, and then we have more, I think 2 episodes, that and another, we talk about how you can overcome workaholism. But one of the times that I always think about being a workaholic, because I have struggled with this at times in the past, I love the opportunity to serve. I love the opportunity to work in missionary work. However, when I got married, my vocation changed. I couldn't put, hey, everything else can go by the wayside. I'm going to do this pro-life thing, I'm going to this pro-life event, writing this article, doing this interview, going on a mission trip. All of that kind of goes out the door because you have a primary responsibility to your spouse. And then I had a kid, and then not only was my primary responsibility to my spouse, but also to my kid. And by the way, first and foremost, of course, is our love for God and maintaining a prayer life. Everything continues to compound. And it compounds, and it builds up. And so what I've realized is if you're struggling with workaholism once you get married, it's got to go. Got to take yourself out of the equation. Whatever vainglory we are chasing after by being workaholics or servaholics, whatever you want to call it, even if you're working for a great ministry, it's got to go. Especially before you have a kid. Especially once you have a kid. Because you're going to stop praying. You're going to stop spending time with your spouse. You're going to stop engaging with your kid if you don't have your priorities in line. And so here's a challenge that all of us have, whether we're married or not, whether we have children or not. Where am I supposed to be? What is my primary responsibility? This is what I'm reminded of every single time I'm sick, especially now that I have a kid. I still have to maintain taking care of the house. I still have to make sure that her diapers are changed, that she's actually fed, that she's bathed, that she's properly engaged, which, by the way, I need to talk about this more. I mentioned it a couple months ago. But did you know that babies born during COVID, have a higher IQ level by over 22 points. Now, this is a significant gap. Researchers are commenting that this is only comparable, the only studies we have to compare with such a huge IQ gap. And again, it's a totally different type of IQ test for babies. It's fascinating. It has to do with facial recognition, among other things. What they're saying is that this is comparable to Romania and children in the Romanian orphanage. If you know anything about this, years ago, children about 25 years ago in Romania who were in orphanages were so malnourished, poorly cared for, lacked physical stimulation, facial recognition, all of these things, that it led to not just short-term developmental delays, but long-term developmental delays and permanent damage. Well, currently, these children that are being born during COVID have such a lack of parental engagement or even engagement from their primary caretakers, the world around them, that their IQs are significantly decreasing. We're seeing delays in speech, cognitive development, social cues, much more that are supposed to be age appropriate for these little ones who have been born during COVID. So this comes back to this whole idea of workaholism as we're talking about it during our marriage hour here on Trending. And it really makes me ponder, how do we find that balance? It's so easy. I hope one thing that we've learned over the last year, that when we're sick, that we don't go, for example, out. We don't go to work and get everyone else sick. We're not around engaging with other people. It's, I think, so important that we're receiving those reminders too. I've been sick the last couple of days. I have a residual throat thing that always lasts for a little while after. Other than that, I'm feeling great, right? And I love the reminders that some people now are saying, hey, stay back if you have to. Don't worry about, going out. You don't want to spread it. You don't want to get other people sick. That's a great reminder. And it's a reminder we need to have more often. Our programming director reminded me of that this morning. And so as I talk about all of this workaholism, being sick, I was struggling during these last couple days. I should check my email. I should get back. I had some emails on Monday that I didn't quite respond to yet. And, there are emails coming in on Tuesday and on Wednesday. And, there are people also I want to catch up with and visit and talk to. And then I'm realizing, no, I'm sick. I'm supposed to rest. Sometimes I think us getting sick is the opportunity for us to actually stop in our lives because we struggle to slow down day to day. I do. I think that's part of the reminder that God at least gives me. I'm also tempted while I'm sick, okay, I should post on social media, I should check my Instagram messages. But here's the reality. I need a real humility check because the world will go on without me and the world will go on without you. And sometimes it's harder when we believe that we hold a role of importance in the work that we do. Sometimes this is harder when we're involved in ministry work because I have to save the world. That means that we have savior complex issues. That means that we have a much higher value and perspective of ourselves than probably most all the world has of us. You see, getting sick is a reminder to be humble. Overcoming workaholism is a reminder that we need to grow in humility. And I'm always reminded that God truly does duplicate time. God has duplicated my time so often. I remember when I was in college, I decided I was going to stop studying other than reading my theology, some theology, not in excess, and of course not the things that made my brain explode. But I was going to slow down. I wasn't going to do homework. I wasn't going to write papers. Any reading, it had to be faith-based reading, and it had to be contemplative and slow and peace-filled so that I could honor the Lord's Day on Sunday, take rest, engage in some fun activities. And let me tell you this. I don't know how I did that. I do not know. Other than by the grace of God, He duplicates time. He increases our focus. Taking that Sunday rest, honoring the Lord's Day as we're encouraged to do so, really does change and save lives. And here's the reality. God blesses our mission if we keep it primary. Do you know what your mission is? I know sometimes this can be harder if we're single. I remember during my single year, sometimes it was hard to remember, what's my mission? Well, first and foremost, all of us have the universal call to holiness. Then we have to remember our state in life. Single, consecrated celibate, married, a parent. Our mission is oriented based on our vocation. Our vocation, our stated vocation, again, marriage or whatever that might be, but also the call to holiness. And that comes to the forefront when we're sick. It's easy to be like, I'm just going to veg out and watch 25 episodes of my favorite show from this season, last season. I'm going to get all caught up. As if we have some right to that. Just because we're sick. In reality, a lot of studies have been done to show that sitting here throwing a screen with lights in front of us actually doesn't allow us to rest. If you're going to rest, you need to close your eyes and go into a dark room and engage with the darkness of rest. That's what allows our mind, our body, everything to relax. And so as I've been pondering this idea of workaholism and marriage, it's important that we remember the world will go on without us. That God has called us first and foremost to the mission of holiness, the vocation of holiness, to the vocation and the people He's entrusted us to, and that if we can't focus first on them and those responsibilities and we're chasing work, why is that? Maybe we need to do some reflecting. Are we seeking attention? Do we need to be needed? Well, how about being needed in our own home? How about meeting our own needs of actually getting some sleep? I would love that. Some sleep sounds great. We've been struggling with, for some reason, one of our alarms in our house, we can't get to go quieter. So for the last 2 days, I've been jolted awake at 5 a.m. I'm not blaming my husband, although we do need to figure out this alarm problem. But it was so loud, I practically had heart palpitations. He was calling me dramatic. Of course, this is being dramatic, but my heart was racing and I could not fall back asleep. It reminds me I can't be a beast now just because I'm sick and I've also been up since 5 a.m. and I have a nursing child. We'll talk about that in a little bit during our Temperance series that we're kicking off here on Trending during our weekly marriage hour. If you've not been joining us during our virtue series, we've gone through the virtue of justice. We've gone through the virtue of prudence. You can find those podcasts at relevantradio.com/trending. The whole series compiled together on justice is forthcoming. But listen, we need to grow in virtue because who is virtuous is happier. In fact, Aristotle, before the time of Christ, a Greek philosopher, came to this conclusion having to do with human happiness. How can we be happy if we're virtuous? So join us during our series as we dive into the great virtue of temperance here on Trending with Timmerie during our weekly marriage hour and how this is important within the context of marriage. We're also going to discuss creating a culture of life and how that's necessary by respecting marriage and what marriage is and the importance of the right context for intimacy. We'll also debunk pro-abortion arguments related to marriage and much more, so don't go away.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
You're joining us during our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. Coming up, we'll continue our virtue series. This week, the virtue is temperance, growing in temperance, and also how we can work on this in our marriages, but also if you're not married as well. Right now, we're going to touch in a moment on debunking pro-abortion arguments, one of which I was shocked, I tell you, the day it was thrown at me. But first, let's talk about creating a culture of life. I think this is a really important conversation and one that we don't have often enough. So I grew up in the pro-life movement. I worked for 5 years in a crisis pregnancy center. As a director of education and outreach, I saw firsthand the struggle that many of these women faced. And time again, I come back to an approach I took starting in high school when I was attending a pro-life camp, and one topic that was not covered the entire time. And let me tell you, it was a 2-week-long pro-life camp. Not once did they talk about chastity, waiting till marriage, your vocation, discernment, relationships. Why is this important? Well, here's the reality. Until we stop having sex with people who we aren't married to, well, abortion isn't going to end. You see, we can follow Supreme Court decisions that actually make this really clear because we see a culture change here in the United States, just as one example. And we took, for example, the consequence of having babies with the decriminalization of hormonal contraception, birth control, with Griswold versus Connecticut. What we saw is we took babies out of sex. Well, what happened? When you took babies out of sex, people started engaging in extramarital affairs, premarital sex. What happened? Well, we actually saw that, next thing you know, lo and behold, no-fault divorce kicked in. Now, no-fault divorce essentially led to where one spouse could leave the other for no reason, even if the other person, the other spouse, didn't want out of the marriage. This was unprecedented here in the United States. Well, what's significant out of this? Well, if we take babies out of sex, that allows us to take sex out of marriage. Now, of course, you have to have the fail-safe because your contraception doesn't always work. Shocking. Even 40, 50, 60 plus years later, since we decriminalized hormonal contraception and it became a widespread, it still doesn't always work. Well, what then happened? We needed a fail-safe. That's why we saw abortion become the law of the land in Roe v. Wade, 1973, and Doe v. Bolton. And grant, they couldn't pass this in legislation passed by the people voting, nor could they pass this with votes in Congress and the Senate. No, they did it from the court because they knew they could manipulate an outcome. Because the reality is that this wasn't necessarily something people were entirely living yet. It was a lifestyle that was being promoted. Well, they did a great job because they took babies out of sex outside of marriage. Abortion became the fail-safe, and now men and women don't know what marriage is for. Men and women don't see the responsibility to parenthood. All of this is important because what started with no abortion in the United States, what started with actually pro-life laws in the United States, included a culture where we believed that sex belonged in marriage. So when we stop engaging in the most intimate acts that are supposed to be the most loving acts, until we stop engaging in those outside of marriage, when we stop recreational sex, well, that's when we will see abortion actually not just decrease, but end. So why did I bring this up in light of pro-life training program that I was involved in as a teenager? Well, they never talked to us about it. And here's the reality. I remember seeing a lot of my peers who were ardently pro-life engaging in sexually promiscuous lifestyles and sex outside of marriage that led them into situations where their pro-life convictions were put to the test. And guess what? People who were one day on the streets advocating for life started to change their minds because they realized and suddenly they thought, well, wow, if I can't have access to abortion, well then my life's over when I make a decision that has to do with my body, supposedly. And all of a sudden they start to kind of twist their ideas when at first they understood very clearly, I'm pro-life. Being pro-life makes sense. Abortion hurts a woman. Abortion hurts a baby. But what's the problem is that we justify certain types of lifestyles. We justify bad habits. We justify our sin. And what happens? Lo and behold, we justify and have justified abortion. I've seen it working in the crisis pregnancy centers where pro-life Catholic families whose daughters in their teenage years and early 20s get pregnant and they're embarrassed because they don't want their parish community to know that their daughter, quote, got knocked up. So they actually even ponder, even encourage an abortion. I've seen it. Maybe you have too. Maybe you've struggled with this because the idea of embarrassment. The idea that your child's life is over. This is the problem. If we want to create a culture of life, that requires putting marriage first. Before intimacy, before babies. We have to teach this to children. We have to teach this to ourselves. That we're teaching, when we're talking about being pro-life, we're talking about being pro-marriage. The two go hand in hand. We can't separate them. Now, it is fascinating because I know many people who say, okay, but if I know this, like if I were to get pregnant, I would keep the baby. Or if my kid were to get pregnant, I would tell them to keep the baby. That's great. Praise the Lord. We all make mistakes. Welcome to the church of the sinners and the saints. Remember, the saints first had to be sinners, unless, of course, you are the Blessed Virgin Mary who was immaculately conceived. People will say, but I would keep the baby. But others won't. One, because of legal abortion, but two, because of a lifestyle that they've justified and now they have to support. For example, let's say, by the way, I'm doing Dave Ramsey's, the financial program for saving money, getting out of debt, all of those things. And my husband and I have been working through it, so of course money analogies are kind of coming to mind here. But people will say, well, okay, I won't have the baby, but other people will. Why? Because, again, abortion's illegal. And we have to support the lifestyle that we're living. Well, there are a lot of people who say, well, I'll never go into debt. Yeah, but when you insist on living a certain type of lifestyle where you get to eat out really often, let's say where you like to shop as much as you want, when you don't set a budget, well, all of a sudden a credit card sounds like a really great idea because I don't have enough money to eat at the end of the month. I don't have enough money for that pair of shoes. So, therefore, what do? I charge it. I put it on a credit card. I spend money that I don't have. Next thing you know, high interest rates, everything. I'm in a mess. And I can either keep that lifestyle, supporting a lifestyle I like, or I could change my ways. I could literally cut the credit card, start saving money, stop eating out, pay off my debt, maybe even sell things and live far below my means in order to get things done financially, to take control of my financial circumstances again. Or I can continue to support my lifestyle of a lack of self-control and continue to have no budget, not live my budget even if I have one, eat out as I please, shop when I want, and just continue to charge it. You see, the credit card enables a certain type of lifestyle. abortion enables another type of lifestyle. Now, those who have been in any type of financial debt know it's not fun. You want out. It creates anxiety. Raising my hand, I have student loans. You don't want it. It brings additional stress. When we live a life that has burdens that shouldn't have to be there, well, it has consequences. And so this is what happens. We continue to support a certain type of lifestyle because that's what we want. Well, that's why when I say that, well, I would keep my baby if I got pregnant. If a family of mine got pregnant, that's great. But we've created a lifestyle, a culture for abortion. And so the only way to change the abortion culture is by respecting and putting marriage first and teaching this. This will lead to a culture change. This will lead to a revolution. Now, this brings me, as we're working through our Debunking Pro-Abortion Argument series, to a very important argument that I was shocked when it was thrown at me. So if you haven't seen the video before, and I'm not sure that this argument made it into the video, there was a lot of great conversations. I did an episode of Middle Ground with Jubilee Media. They create online content that they produce on YouTube, and they debate two sides, and I had the opportunity to go to Hollywood and have a debate with 3 pro-abortion individuals. Now, great conversation. There's a video online. We'll have to go ahead and post a link to that in the show notes for today's show, as well on social media, so you can check that out. Now, we had about 4 hours worth of content. I think it was probably cropped down to like 20 minutes. Now, one of the people who was pro-abortion, she was very, very insistent at a certain point in the conversation that I was pro-life because she looked me up and down, saw I was wearing a nice dress. I was going to be on TV for a video, duh. Saw I was wearing a nice dress, saw I had rings on my finger, that I was married, saw that I combed my hair, and I smiled. And so she determined that I was privileged. Now, it does make me laugh because this was kind of one of those white privilege moments, and she couldn't quite say white privilege because she wasn't exactly sure what my nationality was, but this was a woman who was white, who moved from Middle America, the heart of America, who hated the fact that there were pro-life laws in her area, and she loves California now because abortion was accessible, she could have it whenever she wants, and she was looking me up and down. Of course you would keep a baby. Of course you're pro-life. That's easy for someone like you. I was flabbergasted when she threw this in my face. Just because I was married, just because I chose to wear a dress and a nice dress, because I was going to be filmed and do my hair and maybe put on a pair of earrings and do my makeup nicely, she considered me privileged. And so I had to pull back later and really think about this. And I want to talk about how this is also a part of the whole creating a culture of life and respecting marriage conversation. But first, we can't take arguments that are actually an attack on our person. That's to follow the fallacious thought, a fallacy of thought, where people just say, well, you're ugly, I don't like you, therefore, I'm right. Well, the person didn't call me ugly. They didn't outright say they didn't like me, but they just tried to use some argument to say, well, of course you're pro-life, that's easy for you. Okay, so here's the reality. First, number 1, break the curtain, part it, open it up. That way you can actually have a real conversation with a person and say, my economic status, my clothing, my state of marriage has nothing to do with me being pro-life. That's important to recognize, especially because I didn't get married until my late 20s. So I had a lot of years that in the mind of many people would be a pro-abortion contraception type of lifestyle. I didn't do either. And so I had to talk to her about how, my means, along with other people's means, shouldn't determine the life sentence, live or die of a child. Because what that's saying is that quality of life is what determines whether or not that life should live. And in fact, the woman had no clue of what my quality of life was. She didn't know I had student loans. She didn't know I was choosing to work as a missionary and take next to no income. I was teaching Pilates on the side so I could do volunteer pro-life work and radio work at the time. This was a couple of years ago. She had no idea what my means and capacity were. She had no idea that I was budgeting and literally being extremely frugal with how much food I bought and what things I might desire because I was choosing to live a certain type of lifestyle. So, again, she has no idea. That's beside the point. Her conversation, her pointing the finger at me to begin with, was justification to claim that quality of life determines a death sentence for a baby. That's what the conversation had to do with. And it also determined whether or not a woman's motherhood should be thrown out the door or not. Whether or not a woman should carry post-abortion syndrome and the challenges that come with that. You see, this was a really important argument and one which we don't often discuss. And this, I think, brings us back to a very important perspective. As we're trying to debunk this pro-abortion argument, it comes back to a culture of marriage. I found it kind of odd that this woman kind of believed that it was only the privileged who married. It was only the privileged who had the capacity to easily be pro-life. This shows us that there's a deep, profound, festering wound in our culture. That whether it's because of family of origin or the culture we live in, that many people today think themselves as unable to marry, to stay in a marriage. Whether it's because they believe themselves, and maybe this is you, to be unloved, to be incapable, or maybe they feel like they don't know how, again, because of the culture, because of the family of origin, a broken home, a marriage that fell apart before their eyes, or a single parent. We need to break through the narrative that only the privileged marry. We need to break the tide, break the ongoing system and functions within our family where there may be brokenness, where there may be generational divorce, single parenthood, and say, it stops here. I believe in a culture of marriage, and I will support a culture of marriage. And I will advocate for it. I will fight for it. This is why we have our weekly marriage hour here on Trending, because we must continue to speak out and speak up when it comes to living a pro-life perspective that requires chastity, that requires being pro-marriage, that requires loving ourselves and loving others. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. I will be right back as we continue our virtue series this week on temperance, talking about temperance in marriage. If you're married or not, this episode is for you. We'll be right back. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/forester.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Are you subscribed to Trending with Timmerie on your favorite podcasting app? Well, if you aren't, of course, you should download the Relevant Radio app or wherever you listen to podcasts. Just head over to relevantradio.com/trending where you can subscribe. And by the way, give us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show, wherever you like to listen. Podcasts are also shareable, so all you have to do is grab the link, share it with a friend who you might change their life. Talking about abortion, same-sex marriage, growing in the virtue of prudence. Well, let's dive into the virtue of temperance today, because that's the series we are working through on our virtue series. So we kicked off this week, and I know it was slightly interrupted with my being out because I was sick, talking about temperance. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas says that temperance withdraws man from things which seduce the appetite from obeying reason. So in other words, temperance helps to moderate our behavior and help us to overcome the seductions of our appetites that fail to follow reasonable thought. In other words, it has all to do with being reasonable. Now, if we're ever to talk about virtue, it's important as we ponder virtue as a whole that we understand that virtue is really finding the means between two extremes. For example, with regard to the virtue of temperance, on one side there would be restraint. Absolute restraint to the point where I don't know, let's say, for example, you never spend money. You have so much restraint when it comes to money. You never spend a penny, even when, let's say, you've got a really old shirt that it just shouldn't be worn out in public. And even though you have money to replace it, the means are there. Now, on the opposite end, away from restraint, would be excess. I just buy whatever I want, whenever I want it, and next thing you know, I am swimming in credit card debt. You see, those are two extremes. Well, where is the means? Where is the middle? That's what we're trying to find when it comes to every virtue. That the virtue runs down the center, the balance between two extremes. St. Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle have talked about this. The virtue of temperance has to do with moderation between restraint and excess. Now, we can talk a lot about temperance when it comes to spending money, saving money, alcohol, our sexuality. We could talk about it in many different ways, but I want to talk about it especially within the context of not in marriage, whatever your state in life is. There's a lot that could be said about our responsibilities, seeing those responsibilities, and playing out the life of a virtue within our lives. So we have to find the means between two areas. Again, implementing temperance, moderation, spending versus saving, time spent with other people, liberally versus time protected, the people we do and don't need to spend time with, it is good for us to spend time with, so quantities of time, situations we place ourselves in for length of time. All of these things actually have to do with temperance and moderating these examples. I already shared a little bit earlier today on the show about spending and saving. But let's just ponder another example for a moment. Let's say I really, really, really want a new pair of shoes. Okay, no big deal. I do need a pair of shoes. I need some new winter shoes, living in the Midwest now. But let's say the pair of shoes I like costs about $400. But I really like them. They would fit the purpose for what I need them for, keeping my feet warm, keeping my feet dry, their utility. They're a really smart pair of shoes actually to have, especially as a new mom, and navigating practical shoes. But they're $400. Now I could use all of the positives, the pros, and go ahead and just buy them. Just liberally go for buying whatever I want. I'm free. I can do anything I want. Well, on the opposite extreme, I could have a pair of shoes that has a great big hole in it. My toes sticking out. Maybe there's even a hole in my sock. I'm walking around in these shoes and my feet are freezing to the point where I'm getting sick all the time because I won't just spend the money, stingy, on a pair of shoes I need. And ultimately what's happening is now I'm getting sick all of the time. I can't take care of my family because I'm always sick, and so on and so forth. Now again, these are two extremes. Or I could find a pair of shoes that check all the boxes, but that aren't $400. The reality is we could probably do this. Now that could mean that I buy a brand new pair of shoes that just doesn't cost $400, or I buy a pair of shoes that is a reasonable price, let's hope under $100. Sometimes it's not necessarily practical for a strong, sturdy winter shoe, but let's say I do, and maybe I can't afford that. There's always a thrift store. There are always resale shops online. I can find what is the moderate amount of money to spend, what is necessary for my need, but also possible based on my means, what I have, my capacity to spend. Let's also talk about this from the time spent and time protected with others. Great example of this that I think can be a real challenge today has to do with text messaging, social media, binge watching your favorite show. Let's see, what else could there be? You name it, whatever it is for you. Various things that we do in our technology, even talking on the phone and catching up with loved ones. You see, our time is our most precious commodity. Can never get time back. In fact, I think that time is something that we don't discuss enough when it comes to us struggling with vices and striving for virtue. Now, time spent and protected should always have to do with our responsibilities in life, our state in life. Now, just giving a current example, because this is where I'm at right now, I need to make sure that I don't spend too much time on the phone, whether it be for personal pleasure or work conversations. I need to keep those to a moderate amount so that I can get my work done and so that I pay enough attention to my baby girl. First and foremost, paying enough attention to my baby girl and my spouse. Now, that said, I might really, really miss some of my family members or even a friend from back in California. So I could just feel, well, I really miss them. I'm feeling sad and disconnected from everyone. I haven't really met a ton of people out here yet. And so I could justify day after day after day, maybe spending hours a day on the phone. But if I do that, I'm being negligible toward my responsibilities for the show, toward my responsibilities for my husband and making dinner and keeping the house clean, the responsibilities to my child for spending quality time with her, in the key developmental years, making her feel loved and cherished, meeting all of her needs of nourishment. You see, if we don't protect our time, we can fail in our responsibilities. If we don't protect our time, we'll never pray. If we don't protect our time, we'll never make it on time to church. Let's be real. It's one of my pet peeves when I personally don't get to church on time. I feel like I should just go at a different time. Like if I'm walking in and Mass has already started, even just by a little, I get really frustrated with myself. Why? Well, again, you don't need to be scrupulous, however, because things happen. However, we are able to moderate and have temperance when it comes to our time. Maybe I spent too long on my hair. Maybe I spent too long in bed and I should have gotten my butt up. Could also talk about this from the perspective of people we spend time with. There are people, maybe you have them in your life too, you love catching up with them. But if you spend more than a certain quantity of time, conversation, let's say I have one friend who I love her dearly, I love catching up, but if I had to limit how often I catch up with her, big reason why is because every time I'm with her, she just wants to gossip. Gossip about people we went to school with, gossip about people that she somehow knows in my life, and then next thing you know, it turns into this like negative soapbox about where she's at in her life. Now, grant, you could say that the reason she's gossiping is because she's struggling and go around and around in circles about what's going on. Doesn't matter. I know if I spend a certain amount of time, it goes beyond just catching up and it goes into just wanting to gossip about people. And I could be really weak because, let's be real, we can all be interested and curious about those people we've interacted with in our lives, want to know their faults, failures, and their joys as well, of course, right? Okay, so this is a great example where I have to moderate the amount of time spent. Maybe I shouldn't spend time with this person if I'm really tired because I'm just going to be lazy, unaware, because sometimes I feel like I've got a sword and I'm having to like hack at various words she sends my way. Otherwise, I recognize it could go down a conversation hole that just should not happen. I mean, really, really shouldn't happen. So here's the reality. Restraining ourselves from good things can actually be really, really hard to do, even waiting for good things that we want. A great example of this is often, when you get that paycheck, you're like, oh great, I've got money. Maybe if you live paycheck to paycheck or whatever it might be, or even just you're excited. It's like a little kid again. Like, oh man, I just got $10 for an allowance. I gotta go spend this right away. Let's see how many Snicker bars and Butterfingers I can buy. It's like payday, ding, 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 ding. Well, the next thing you know, you find yourself broke when you need to buy lunch, when it's at the end of the month, and you become a broke beggar at the end of the month using your credit card or mooching off of other people. Or you have to go back to your parents who just got your allowance and say, I didn't have any money for lunch, even though that money maybe was specifically for lunch when you take a day to go hang out and play with a friend. So all of this in mind, we have to keep our vocational perspective first and foremost, especially when we're talking about marriage. Marriage requires us an even more intense level of virtue, a different type of virtue than perhaps we've been used to. And so we have to watch the time spent at work and be moderate with the time we give to special projects, chatting by the water cooler, sending too many emails, reading too much news, whatever it might be that could get in the way of us getting our work done, remembering that we work to live, we work to provide for our families, and walk away. We also have to moderate how much time is spent watching TV and the type of TV shows, social media and the type of social media, the games, the texting, the phone call communication, even with loved ones. St. Augustine said that temperance is love surrendering itself wholly to him who is its object. I'll say that again. Words from the saints. Temperance is love surrendering itself wholly to him who is its object. In other words, temperance is our capacity to show love and surrender ourselves totally toward God. See, charity, love, the love of God is always at the heart of every virtue. If you have charity, you have all the other virtues. This is why temperance is love surrendering itself wholly to him who is its object. We have to find our responsibility. That's why I love the book Love and Responsibility, written by St. John Paul II before he was Pope as Cardinal Wojtyla. Because he talks about love from the perspective of responsibility and understanding that. You see, today we often think about responsibilities as obligations. We drag our feet, we hate them, we love them, we're angry at them. That's why a lot of people are going no contact with their parents, because they've lost a sense of understanding and balance when it comes to their relationships with their parents, whether it have to do with wounds from their childhood, expectations, stress they put on themselves, whatever it might be. We have to learn to embrace, love, and respect our responsibilities in life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. As we talk about virtue, St. Maximus the Confessor, when talking about temperance, said, "Let us show that we eat for the sake of living, and not be guilty of living for the sake of eating." Oof, okay, if anyone struggles with food, this is a great quote. This should be like your diet slogan. You're welcome. Here's your muse. I'll read it again. "Let us know that we eat for the sake of living, and not be guilty of living for the sake of eating." Okay, I rewrote this note. So that's St. Maximus the Confessor. But let's think about this in different perspectives. For example, talking. Let us show that we talk for the sake of loving and not be guilty of talking for the sake of being loved. In other words, talk because it helps us to love others by teaching, by admonishing, by even just simple conversations. But do not be guilty of talking for the sake of being loved. That is, to be loved by others because you've got the real great gossip that other people will be interested in, and therefore they will be interested in you. Don't talk for the sake of being praised. Don't talk for the sake of hearing yourself, or because you're always right and darn it, I've got to get the last word in. I also did another rewrite on this quote from St. Maximus the Confessor, because I was thinking about this in another way. Let us show that we watch for the sake of learning, and not be guilty of watching for the sake of possessing. This I think is really important, because it has to do with everything from social media, TV, YouTube, TikTok, you name it. Let us show that we watch for the sake of learning and not be guilty of watching for the sake of possessing. This could touch us on the areas of jealousy and envy. That we're watching or, for example, checking in on social media to see a joyful photo of our loved one, rather than being guilty of watching for the sake of, I really want their lifestyle, I hate them, because you're jealous or envious. Or just getting down in the dumps and depressed because you're comparing yourself to somewhere else. Well, they're here and I'm there, and I don't like that. Or for the sake of lusting. Let's be real. TV, movies, social media, all kinds of videos can be a temptation. We're not watching for the sake of learning. Trust me, you have no need to watch porn for the sake of learning. You're watching for the sake of possessing, for lusting, for taking. Also, we have to remember that sometimes when we're watching even just simple good things on social media, movies, television, YouTube videos. I can't stand YouTube. It feels like such a waste of time. That realize when we're doing this, even if we're watching or engaging in good things, we can actually be stealing other people's time. How so? Well, based on our state in life, based on our responsibility. Maybe our spouse or a child has a right to our time. And so it's selfish time spent when it really belongs to others. You see, this is why charity is so important to all of the virtues. Because through charity, by charity, we show our love for one another. By charity, we're encouraged to practice the virtue of temperance. And so I encourage you, as we continue our virtue series on temperance tomorrow, please join us. But remember that temperance is what helps us to moderate between two extremes of restraint and excess. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. I'll be back tomorrow. Now, take it off. Enjoy praying the family rosary across America.